Doing these from my phone is a little bit annoying. But anyway, in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about why so many. Let's move the camera back a little bit. So there's a nursing shortage, and it's not just a shortage, but it's a shortage in many different fields. But on this particular video, we're going to cover a little bit about the nursing shortage. And the chief reason that there is a nursing shortage is overwhelmingly because it's a female dominated job industry. And so this isn't something that is in particular to nursing. They see the same thing in medicine because now I think it's 60% of all general practitioners are women. And so the AMA, I think this was back in maybe 2020, 2019, came out with a study article talking about why are so many women walking away from medicine. And of course, the answer was that when they became mothers, up to 40% of them were opting either to just leave medicine altogether, or many of them opted for part-time work. And so what you end up with, obviously, in a scenario where 60% of your general practitioners are women and 40% of that 60 are then opting to walk away or go part-time, what you end up with is shortages. And this is the same thing to do in nursing. 40%, I believe it's 25% quit by year one. 40% of nurses quit by year three. Now, of course, there'll be a lot of complaining about long shifts, short lunches, but realistically speaking, I've been a nurse 12 years, and so especially if you work at night, there are very huge portions of the shift where you do absolutely nothing, very minimal work, especially at night. Once you give out your meds, most patients by 10, 11 o'clock, especially because most of the patients I work as a travel nurse, most of those patients are typically asleep through the night and they don't want to be waking up. We unfortunately have to wake them up to do vitals, give out medications, IV, antibiotics. And so we're waking them up when they should be asleep, when they want to be asleep. A lot of them get upset because they're like, how am I supposed to get better? You won't let me sleep. And so we're actually causing ourselves, in essence, more work, obviously having to wake these patients up in the middle of the night. But overwhelmingly, in all fields where women are the dominant leaders of those roles, you will experience shortages, especially as women become mothers, they give birth to children, they want to spend time with their children. They don't want to go to work. They don't look at the value of the work and then leaving their children at home. They would rather do that. And so this is what the AMA discussed. This is not only discussed by the AMA, but it's also discussed by the Bar Association, because the exact same statistic of up to 40% of women quit working as lawyers is for the same reason. Because then when they become mothers, they then want to stay at home and be mothers, and they don't want to be lawyers. I remember a very long time ago, back when Stefan Molyneux was still on YouTube, and he had his free domain radio podcast, and he interviewed this woman who I know she was in a European country, but I don't remember if it was like from like Sweden or like a Scandinavian-ish country. In any event, the woman was on there. She had been practicing medicine, I believe, for 6 years. And her country, it's all since all the healthcare system is all socialized in terms of education, they spend to the tone of about $250,000. And so she's on his podcast talking about how she wants to walk away from medicine and doesn't want to practice. And what was the reason? Because she became a mother. And so the Bible, in areas where society and men have put this heavy burden upon the shoulders of women, many of them don't want to bear that burden, and it's seen psychologically. This is why you see such a high level of women are on antipsychotics, antidepressants, etc. The most common diagnosis that you see on a woman that comes into the hospital is anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder. You might see schizophrenia, but often PTSD is now a very high diagnosis that I see all the time on women. And I'm like, you're 26, you're 27. What did you go through that was, PTSD worthy? And of course, maybe if it was related to abuse, like physical abuse, psychological abuse, or overwhelmingly this is just a diagnosis for the purpose of giving these people medications because they're very unhappy with their lives because they're not fulfilling their lives in the role in which that they were designed, which was to be caretakers of their family and perhaps extended family. And once you've achieved that, then you can move forward. But for many of these women that are gaslit into becoming, the boss babes, they're gaslit into being strong and independent. And then as time goes by, psychologically, they're not able to bear that burden because the Bible says that God created women in the position of a helper. And so they were not designed to take on these big roles. They were not designed to take on and share the load. They were designed there to help men. And so many of these women, you see the shortages in nursing, and overwhelmingly because it doesn't pay by comparison to, say, doing something like OnlyFans. And you see a lot of young women going that route. Or some people are like, well, why would I want to deal with, urine and feces and angry patients and sick people and working, I don't know, alternating weekends, etc., when they can do another job that maybe makes more or the same. And so you see a lot of women who normally would take these roles, and of course there is this large group of people complaining nowadays about work, not wanting to work. They kind of see all the taxation, inflation, and so this is going to impact women even more so. And so for generations, the government, because they have been guilty of creating all of this inflation, we're always gaslighting women that, oh, it's the patriarchy that wants to keep you barefoot and pregnant. It's all these men who want to keep you at home, and all they want you to be are wives, and they want you to be slaves. And then you became slaves to the government. You became slaves to corporations. You became slaves to hospitals. You became slaves to working in retail or to working at the corporate office, right? And so all you did was just trade one master for another. And this is exactly why women are living the statement that Jesus made, that you cannot slave for two masters, for you end up hating and despising and favoring the other one. This is exactly what happens with women who want to be wives, but then also want to be involved in working, corporate America. They want to have a career. And so it then pits heads with their husbands, who in essence are their quote unquote masters, as Jesus had said. And so naturally you have your boss, which is typically a male at work, and then you have your husband at home who's saying he needs you to do this, that, and the other. And then you have your boss that says you need to work overtime, we need you for an extra day, you need to stay after work, can you take this home with you and get it done? And then what is it doing, right? It's pitting the two masters of your life against each other. And so as Jesus said, you cannot love both. You cannot love two masters. You cannot slave for both of them, because you'll end up hating one and loving the other. You'll despise one and end up sticking to the other. And overwhelmingly, because the culture pushes women to hate men, despise their husbands, look at their husbands in a negative light, that they're just keeping them slaves, when the reality is it's the corporations that keep people slaves, in conjunction with the government that makes people use currencies and counterfeits the currency through inflation, which is why women had to go to work. Back in the 70s, they were hoping, after seeing rampant inflation in the 70s, they were hoping that as time went by, that less women would have to work, and that didn't pan out the way that they supposedly thought it was going to work out, because now they had all this inflation, so they needed more labor so they can drive down the cost of labor, because now you have more women that are entering into the workforce, and so it pushes the cost down of labor, even though that labor might not be as efficient as having a man in that role. I particularly think men would make better nurses for the most part. When it comes to things that are more like in the intimate setting, like putting in Foley's, you can always find a woman, and I particularly go that route. I always look for a female nurse, because most women don't want, a man all up in there, for the most part, especially if they're younger, they tend to want a female nurse. Even many older women, they're like, do you mind having one of the aides, a female, come assist me to the bathroom or help me get cleaned up? I can do it. I have done it. I'm, by no means shy to it, so to speak. But many women are. Many men in the field also prefer having a female nurse than typically some male for the most part. And it typically depends on what the task is that is being assigned. If it comes to things like bathing, they might prefer a woman. When it comes to assisting them out of bed, helping them ambulate, doing physical therapy, typically you're going to need someone who's a lot stronger to do that role. And so it's not that they can't perform in these roles, it's when the bulk of the work and the load is placed on women that women typically don't want to perform those loads because they can't manage the stress. I can't tell you how many times I hear women and have seen women who are just responsible just for being a charge nurse, and they just can't take it. They'll go off and cry in the med room or find a place where they can go and relax. And this is quite common to see in many fields that are dominated by women, because they're just not designed to manage the stress. And so in all these areas where they've pushed and forced women, through gaslighting, through manipulation, through propaganda, where they're like, oh, you don't need a man. You can be strong and you're independent all on your own. It's because they need you, because they need to tax you. They also need you to go out there and have your own apartment, have your own car, have your own job, and everybody's going to be independent so that we can consume more, so we can send those dollars overseas, so we can maintain our role in terms of the hegemony, the control over currency. And this is why you see a lot of songs talk about the strong and independent female. I don't need no man. That men are trash, whatever it is. They have a lot of these different songs, and they're overwhelmingly geared towards pushing women into the workforce because they need you. They need you to go out there and consume. This is why in many of these industries, like for example, the day in the life of a Twitter worker, many of the women that work at Facebook, a lot of these jobs are fake. They're given more money than they would give a man. And this was actually talked about when Google did they're in a narrative that women are paid less, 75 or 60 cents, whatever it is, paid on the dollar by comparison to a man. And then Google was like, yeah, we're going to go in there and we're going to audit and make sure that we're paying women the fair share. And then it turned out that they were actually paying the men less. And of course, this is by narrative, because when women are paid more than a male, they're typically going to look for a man who earns equal or more. And so as a nurse, most nurses, especially if you live in a city, are earning six figures. Right? A New York Presbyterian, I think it's like $120,000 at night, between your differential, whatever your experience differential is, and your academic experience. You're earning about $120,000. It's very difficult for a male in New York to earn that kind of a money. And so what you end up with is this plethora of women who are single by design, and then you have all these men who can't meet the standard of, I need a man who makes more than I do. Because this is done by design to keep women single, because they don't care about the currency. The currency is for the most part irrelevant. What they need is the control over the people here in the country and those abroad by controlling the currency. This is why I think it was the Rothschild that said, I care not who makes the laws so long as I can control the currency. Because if you can control the currency, then you can control the country. You can control countries this way. And so it's okay for them to pay women a higher salary, artificial. They just need you to consume. This is the most important thing that women can do, is consume. And so they end up not meeting what do they call it? There was articles talking about there's no, like the financially favorable male. There aren't a lot of men out there that are, meeting the finance requirements of today's woman. And this is done by design. The design is to keep women single for the purpose of consumption. We need you to go out there and consume. In the beginning, they needed people to tax. They needed to create more inflation. Now they need you to consume so that those currencies continue to go abroad. And there's all sorts of studies that show that married women consume less than single women. There's plenty of studies that show that women who are in debt, which is why they push women into college debt and into credit card debt, both of which the majority holders are women, that show that those women who have college debt and credit card debt, very difficult for them to find a husband. And so by design, they keep you single. This only works so long. You only have so many generations where this will actually work. This is why They need to continually to expand the amount of people that they can enter into the banking system. This is the purpose of a one world currency, so that socialism always requires more of other people's money. And so, in the long run, what you end up with is communism. In many of these smaller countries, that's what you'll end up with, instead of what America has, which is a very soft style of communism. Socialism is just a softer version of communism, as long as there are resources. As long as there are resources for us, well, we don't need to be that authoritarian. But once there's a lot of shortages, well, then now we need to be authoritarian, because we need to control those resources. This is why you see America kind of pseudo sanctioning countries that want to use natural gas, that want to use coal, that want to use wood, because these communities, these countries, economically are starting to grow. And so we need to hinder their growth and say, no, you need to use windmills. Oh my God, you're using fossil fuels? Who uses fossil fuels? We're so much better than that. So if you're going to do that, well, then we can't give you loans. And so this is a sort of narrative of control. You always have to find ways to control people, so that through socialism, you can pull away and devalue their labor. This is what all currencies do. The sole purpose of a fiat currency is to introduce socialism into the country, and central banking has done that. And so the narratives to get them where they want to go include educating women, pushing women into the workforce, lack of and it leads to, of course, naturally, lack of childbirth. All socialist countries go through this exact same thing. And so as this system in the United States and in Europe has exhausted their means, they now need to go into other countries and start pushing feminism. This is what you saw the Clintons doing, and even what's his name, Trump's daughter, what's her name, Ivanka. She was going off into many of these second or third world countries, and she was pushing feminism. Why? Because they want to push women into the workforce for the same reason. Why? For consumption. Because a husband typically will control the consumption of the home, because he's typically the one that's bringing in the lion's share of the money to go out and buy resources. And so that he can have his wife at home, to tend to the home, to take care of and raise the children, consumption needs to be controlled. And obviously the government doesn't want controlled consumption. They want as much consumption as possible. And so this is why they pit husbands against wives. And as Jesus said, you cannot be slaves to two masters. And so the outcome is, what you end up with is with very low birth rates, which is why you see, the borders wide open in many countries, and all Western countries all experience the exact same issue with birth rate. And it's overwhelmingly because of socialism. Socialism has shown for decades, in every single country where they've tried it, they end up with a low birth rate, because of everything that I just stated previously in the video. Because you got to push women into the workforce, then they're not having children. You got to focus on educating women. They're not during their most fertile years, when they should be having children, increasing society, helping maintain a level of society. Otherwise, you just end up disappearing. And so the concept of shortages in many of these areas, like in law, in nursing, medical field, you're going to see this moving forward. And so if you think that there are shortages now in many of these areas, it will only continue to get worse, because many of these women will just opt out of working. They'll go part-time. They'll eventually try to find husbands to bear children with, and the government will do everything to combat that. This is why they had that article talking about by 2030, you're going to have 45% of women single and childless during their most fertile years. And this will dramatically impact many Western countries. And this is why you hear them talking about AI and automation and robotics. It's all bullshit. It's all a fugazi. It's a facade, because people are a resource. People are a resource. And so when your goal is socialism, when your goal is to rob from people, there are so many devastating effects that it has on people. And so the most overwhelmingly, what we're seeing is shortages in the mental health of most women nowadays deteriorating. It is what it is. When people experience the collapse of all things, hopefully they'll understand why. But if you don't, you just end up repeating. You end up repeating. This is why they say if you don't understand history, then you're just doomed to repeat it. And so the history that was shown back in the 1700s and the 1800s and the 1900s, we're just literally repeating the same mistakes, because as far back as I have looked, this is what you end up with. Socialism always ends the same, always. It ends up with shortages, and it ends up with the deterioration and destruction of society. Anyway, I'm going to leave it here. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.